Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the ninth film from Quentin Tarantino, one of my favorite directors of all time. I actually did a podcast earlier this week with Brandon Draven over on the Geek the 101 podcast where we reviewed all of Tarantino's movies from Reservoir Dogs all the way until Hateful Eight. So I will leave a link to that down below. Check that out. But today, we're talking about the ninth movie, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and a movie that I saw a 4 p.m. showing of the movie today, early showing, and it was packed. Quentin Tarantino might be the only director that's still making consistent movies nowadays where his name sells movies. Like, you put Quentin Tarantino's name in a movie poster or in a movie title and it sells films. Spielberg's one of those guys. I was going to say James Cameron, but he hasn't done a movie in 10 years. But there are certain directors that have that kind of equity and that kind of respect consistently. So Once Upon a Time in Hollywood follows the same trend as Django Unchained, Inglourious Basterds, and The Hateful Eight, in that it is a period piece that takes place in the 1960s. In fact, actually 1969 is the year it takes place. And it's sort of Tarantino's alternate reality kind of retelling of certain events that happen. It's like a fictional biopic, but not really, because the characters, this movie has a mixture of like real people that existed in the real world as well as made up people, but characters that are in many ways reflective of where the world was at the time, and several different real characters kind of combined together. So the movie stars Leonardo DiCaprio, Brad Pitt, and Margot Robbie, and those are your three main characters, and there are also other characters, other big actors like Luke Perry pops up, Bruce Dern, so many of them, Kurt Russell, they're all there. And then, by the way, this is Luke Perry's last movie before he passed away, so it was kind of bittersweet, but they're all in this movie, plus other characters, other actors, as kind of side characters, but really it's about our main three. DiCaprio plays Rick Dalton, who is essentially a TV star from the 50s whose career is kind of on the decline. He gets some advice to go do films, and he has to struggle with kind of finding his confidence again. That's essentially his sort of character, and that's his story. He was like a huge deal on this TV show from the 50s called Bounty Law, which is not a real show. It's sort of like a parody of Western kind of action shows from back in the day, low budget ones. And one thing I loved about this movie, because this is a very well-made film, there's a lot of love put into this film, is that when you see scenes from like his TV show Bounty Law, it's in 4:3 aspect ratio, not widescreen. So Tarantino made sure to have it be accurate. And throughout the entire movie, this whole film is a big love letter, not just to Los Angeles in 69, a love letter to Hollywood, to the 60s, in cinema, and to old TV shows. There's so many references to old shows. There are scenes of old TV shows, old commercials that have been kind of like remade, but so accurately, because when I was a kid, obviously I was born in the 80s, so I didn't see these shows when they first aired, but I saw them on Nick at Night, and I knew about shows like Bonanza and things like that, and also the old westerns. They were pretty big, Lone Ranger and stuff like that, and this movie really captures that. Now, my favorite character of the movie is Brad Pitt's character, Cliff Booth. Now, Cliff Booth is Rick Dalton's stunt double, right? And they're kind of buddies, and you would think in the film that they're going to have like an adventure together, and that's not really what happens throughout the majority of the second act. In fact, the story of Cliff Booth, Rick Dalton, and Margot Robbie's character, Sharon Tate, who was a real person, by the way, a real actress. Cliff and Rick are not real people, but Sharon was. They have 3 different storylines. They all go their separate ways, and Rick's story is, like I said, an actor trying to kind of find his way again. And then Cliff's story, not only is he a stuntman for Rick, but he's also a very close friend, but he goes off on his own sort of adventure. He goes off and gets caught up in his own kind of problem. And it really reminded me of Pulp Fiction, how you had Jules and Vincent in the first act, then you had Bruce Willis's character in the middle. That's kind of how this felt, but in this movie they kept going, cutting between the 3 characters' main stories. But, in Pulp Fiction, Bruce Willis gets caught up in some stuff he didn't mean to get caught up in, making a kind of a bad judgment call, so to speak. Something similar happens to Cliff Booth, but what I love about Cliff Booth's character, and this is one of my favorite characters Tarantino has ever come up with, because he is so freaking cool. He's so likable, and he's a badass. And that's what I love, is that obviously stunt people are way more badass than actors. Actors might be better at performing roles and, being thespians and being great performers, but stunt people are, really the tough, unsung heroes of Hollywood, and he remains a tough guy throughout the entire movie. And what I love about the movie, about Cliff Booth, is that he knows that he's not an actor, but he's real deal. He is real deal tough. And as you watch the film, you constantly see how tough he is. Then we have Margot Robbie as Sharon Tate. This is the lady who, in real life, of course, had a very tragic end at the hands of Charles Manson, married to Roman Polanski, the guy who directed Rosemary's Baby and a bunch of other movies. And her character is sort of like somebody who is still in the middle of her career peak, still producing content, producing films, but she's about to voluntarily sort of step out of the limelight, and that's kind of her story. To be honest, Sharon Tate's character arc to me was the weakest part of the movie as far as the three main characters go. The other two are way more interesting. She's just kind of whatever. Now, that being said, the acting, the performances in this movie are absolutely fantastic. DiCaprio, Pitt, Robbie, everybody's good. Everybody is good in this movie. Margaret Qualley, as Pussycat. She's very interesting, an interesting character, to say the least. I'm not going to spoil it. Al Pacino's in this movie, and he's hilarious. The movie has a lot of good going for it, but it's not really, to me, a top tier Tarantino film, in my opinion. I did like the movie. I enjoyed it, but to me, I liked Hateful Eight way more. I liked Django more. I liked, obviously, the Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs. It was, to me, one of the more mid-tier Tarantino films, in my opinion. And as I'm watching the movie, I'm kind of thinking, okay, this is good, but not great. But the final climactic scene in the film is so freaking fun and so good that it really, if it wasn't for that last scene, I'd probably give this movie like a 2.5 out of 5. And the main reason why is, first of all, like I said, the strong suits, the characters, the locations, the cinematography. LA looks incredible in this movie. I've never been to LA in '69, but I've been to LA once, and they made it look really, really nice. But the problem with the movie is that it's really, really long and really, really slow unnecessarily. The first act to me is way, way too slow. There are scenes as I'm watching the film that could have been cut out of the movie, and when I got done with the movie, those scenes serve no purpose. There's a scene where there's two characters that are like in a car driving, and Tarantino keeps the shot on them for way too long, and it's just, they could have cut that whole thing out and it wouldn't have taken anything away from the plot. Same thing with another scene with another character driving on the highway that just went way too long, and I felt like there was no development there. There was no great dialogue there. It's just a scene that's there that's not necessary, in my opinion. I just thought it was way too long. If you're gonna go see this movie, understand that the first act takes way too long, and you have to really wait for it to get interesting. I thought it started great, then it had kind of a slow, then it gets better, of course, when they introduced Bruce Lee, because he's the guy who they got to play Bruce Lee in this movie, right? He's incredible. He looks exactly and sounds exactly like Bruce Lee. It was the funniest. It was hilarious as to how close he was to Bruce Lee. I wish that Tarantino gave him more screen time. I wish he had his own movie. I would love if Tarantino did like another a kung fu film with this dude playing Bruce Lee. That would just be amazing. It would just make me smile. But the problem with the movie is just that. It takes too long. To me, it didn't really have that sort of whodunit aspect of Hateful Eight. It didn't have that great good versus evil redemption story that Django and Kill Bill had. It didn't really have the amazing dialogue of Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction. It didn't have that. It had great dialogue, don't get me wrong. Tarantino's great at doing that, and great characters. That's one thing that Tarantino will always be great at, and that's characters. And the most important thing in movies is characters. The most important thing in a story is characters, because that's what you're left remembering, how much you like these characters. And I love these characters, and to me, that is the main pro of this film. Plus, one thing I like too is that Tarantino subverts your expectations multiple times. There's a scene in the middle of this film involving Cliff Booth that builds up so much tension, right? There's tension being built up, built up, built up. And it really reminded me of the Inglourious Bastards strudel scene and the first scene with Christoph Waltz. Very similar to those scenes where Tarantino is building up this tension and then he just sweeps you under the rug and you're not expecting to see what happens and it just, okay, that was it. He does that a few times in the film. And unlike Rian Johnson and his crap Last Jedi, the main difference between the way he subverts expectations in this movie is that in this movie, the characters are actually likable. And the movie really doesn't waste your time with side stories that really amount to nothing. Except for, I would say, one, but I have to see it again because I may have missed something. But there was one scene that I thought was just kind of... there was one scene in the middle of the movie that I thought was just really pointless. But again, maybe I have to go back and see it to kind of understand. But everybody's so good in this movie. The acting is so great. DiCaprio is such a lovable character. Like I said, Cliff Booth is great. And that's why you're going to like the movie, is the characters, point blank. That is the reason you're going to enjoy the film. And also, if you grew up on these old shows, if you are familiar with the old kind of TV shows, the old films of this era, you'll find a lot more to enjoy. I feel like some of the younger people, this movie skews to an older audience. I'm not even going to blow smoke up your ass. If you're younger and you have, I guess, less attention span than grown people, you might not like this movie. I'm going to tell you that straight up. You're probably not going to like this movie. But the ending you'll like for sure. But the majority of the film, you're probably going to be just like, okay, I don't get it. But if you're a bit older, I'd say over the age of 25, you'll like it a bit more, in my opinion. Of course, it is a classic. I don't want to spoil it, but it's got some Tarantino-isms in this movie. So overall, good movie. Fun movie, lots of love for LA, lots of love for this time period. Tarantino is still a huge fan of movies. You can tell by watching this film. No Sam Jackson cameo, no Quentin Tarantino cameo, even though I know that Tim Roth and, James Marsden actually shot extra scenes, but they were cut from the movie. Maybe in the Blu-ray we'll get like the full, their scenes, and I'm a huge Tim Roth fan. But overall, again, a positive movie. The ending I loved. Some folks might not like that ending, but I enjoyed it. And go see it. I think it's good. Not great. Not anywhere close to Tarantino. It's not even in Tarantino's top 5. But it's good. The guy can't make a bad movie. So that's my opinion. What's yours? Let me know in the comments. And thank you for watching.